So I can't tell you how excited I am to announce our moderator for tonight. He's a man that I've learned a lot from. He's a man who has a ton of experience in the cloud space and just a lot of deep dive experience, and is known as quite an influencer as it relates to what was on demand, is now cloud, has gone through many different words and iterations. He is an analyst with GigaOM, and he's also a blogger for InfoWorld, and you even have another show now, right? Yeah. TechTarget Cloud Computing Weekly Podcast. And he actually put up with me for a cloud computing show with This Week in Cloud Computing for about 1.5 years. I don't know how you did that. So I would love to welcome up here, all the way from the East Coast, all of you, Dave Linthicum.
Does this work? I have a lot of respect for Amanda because first rule of Fight Club, don't talk about Fight Club. So anyway, thank you very much. We've got a great show for you today. We've got a great bunch of panelists, and we're going to start talking about some of these concepts, about this little-known concept of cloud computing that I keep hearing a lot about. We're going to figure out what it's all about. But first, let's get our panelists up here. First and foremost, Alistair, I'm blowing it now. Parkinson, who's the CTO of SOA Software. He was on a call with me today and actually pulled the fire alarm when things were going very well. Have a seat, please. Scott Kritz, I blew that as well. CEO of Bitium, talked to him as well. And great company, if you take a look at Bitium, they have some great security stuff. And you would be happy to take a look at it specifically if you're moving into the cloud. And last but not least, Eric Pillier, who's the CEO of Service Mesh. Come on up, Eric. And he pretty much owns everybody in this room. So have a lot of respect for him, please. And I guess Alex isn't here, right? There he is. Okay, Alex Kazarani, did I get that right? Who's the chairman and CEO of Edgecast, and I think he owns the rest of you guys, who are owned by Eric. So anyway, let's get going here. We're going to talk about this topic called shifting perspectives, ultimately in enterprise IT as it moves into the cloud. So we're going to talk about how the cloud is changing the enterprise, or should be changing the enterprise, or lack of a better term. So let's talk about this notion of agility. And we've been kind of bantering this about. You guys at SOA Software, you know, you came from that. Business agility, business agility, business agility. The ability to basically adapt our infrastructure to allow ourselves to change, which was something we tried to do over the last 10 years, never accomplished it. Okay, what went wrong, Alistair? Can you tell me?
Well, you really did set me up there. I think that there's a number of factors why agility never worked out with SOA, and I'll be frank, because I can be. I think that there's a couple of issues with SOA and how people have actually implemented SOA over time. I think that they focused a lot on the technology. I don't think some of the technologies were really the right technologies. And I don't think that they focused on their development and best practices enough. So when you look at how people tackled service orientation, which was supposed to give them this agility, they got really bogged down in exposing a set of services without thinking about really what the business benefits were or what the alignment was to the business. So they really lacked a kind of control and the kind of a discipline that they really needed to do it right. So they ended up building a whole bunch of services which had really no realizable business value. And at the end of 4 years, they turned around and say, well, it's a failure. So when you look at achieving agility with something like a service orientation, or with something like API management, which is what we're heavily involved with now, it's really important to look at how it affects your processes and how it aligns with your business first, and then figure out how you're going to do it.
So, have they lost, or have we lost confidence in central IT as far as getting us to a point where we're going to provide additional agility to make things happen? I noticed that all of my clients, they're building rogue clouds. So divisions in the companies, in essence, feel that they're empowered to go off and solve some of their problems going forward. So Eric, what do you think about that? Do you think that central IT is ever going to get it and regain control and start providing us with business agility now that we have the cloud as an asset which will allow them the capability of doing it?
Yeah, I do. I think because they're going to have to. Not everywhere, but in the world's largest companies, in the enterprise and in governments, they are going to have to regain control because they're highly regulated. They have to be compliant, and people are going around them. And if you talk about agility, you have to talk about what that really means, and it's not a technical issue. It's a business issue. It's how fast can you get from a concept to go into production, actually get something to market and make money. So what we faced over the last few years is that there was a monopoly. The IT organization had a monopoly, and what happens with monopolies is they get fat, dumb, and stupid, and they sit around and you ask them for something, and they'll get to it when they can get to it. What the lock-in caused was an inability for the business units to actually move fast, to have agility. The global economic downturn and the advent of cloud models allowed and then forced them to go around IT and get done what they had to do. So in highly regulated industries and in governments, you can't do that. You actually have to rein it back in. So to answer your question, what's going to happen is a global transformation of IT organizations into service brokers. So they can offer that kind of agility and convenience, but still maintain the security and compliance and auditability that's necessary.
So in essence, we're getting around to getting service-oriented architecture, at least the idea or the notion or the concepts behind it right, finally, because we're figuring out that the way of moving things forward won't work. We're building things at the division. Central IT is ultimately going to take control, and we're doing so with superior technology, superior talent, or all of the above.
I don't know about superior talent, but I think it's certainly less talent. I mean, one pathway to agility is get rid of a lot of people. What you want to do is you want to automate as much as possible, so you have end-to-end automation, removing manual labor and processes wherever you can, and then standardize. So if you're automating and standardizing, you're going to lower your cost, and you're going to have less people involved, and you're going to deliver this IT, of what people think of as IT to get their work done, deliver it as a service. In other words, it's not IT anymore for IT people, it's IT for business people. Give it to them directly.
Alex, you agree?
Yeah, I think one additional comment to add, I think central IT's focus is going to change to one where if they do it right, and if they get it right, is where they're adding a lot more value. And the value to the organization is not managing the data center, managing a bunch of hardware, managing transit connections and routers. The value to the organization is what is this IT application supposed to do? How much is it going to help us increase the top line or reduce the cost structure? And if the IT organization is able to adapt and perform that function, then it becomes very valuable to the organization as opposed to being the bottleneck of the organization.
So a reporter called me today and they asked me what's different with cloud computing versus all the other waves of technology that came up in the past. And this is a mainstream media, you know how those guys are. And what I stated was it's not necessarily that cloud computing makes things better. We're in essence repeating the same kind of technological patterns we have from years gone by. We're able to manage those things better and basically organize them and allocate them better to the people who need them. So am I wrong, Scott? Do you think that's absolutely what cloud computing is going to bring us?
That's a great question. I think cloud computing is, we're hearing everyone say kind of the same thing here, which is IT and business can be at ends with each other. They can work together. I think with cloud computing, it kind of takes that and puts it on steroids, meaning all of a sudden, the reason you have Salesforce buying ExactTarget and Perdot is because there really is consumerization of the web, meaning any individual in a company is empowered to go out and use a technology. So you're really putting things in the hand of the business needs and kind of ignoring IT. So the question is really, well, what do you do about that as an IT manager, as an IT professional? How do you deal with that? Do you lock things down? And I think it's been proven that, yes, there are companies that are regulated and there are regulation issues that lockdown is 100% needed. But in most cases, these are, even in regulated industries, individuals and companies going out and finding the best applications for what gets their job done better. And I think the cloud has enabled people to be empowered to do that on their own. The real interesting question is, as IT, as the CIO, the CTO, how do you deal with that? Do you try to lock it down? Do you embrace it? What mechanisms do you use to embrace it? And so I think it's again, it's driven by business need, but it's really that need is even more apparent now that cloud and pretty valuable software is being built in the cloud, but it's now being adopted by anybody.
I had a friend of mine who's a CIO of a Global 2000 company, and he's kind of scared. It was me. He's kind of scared right now in that, I'll stand over here for a bit. I know, I'll stay away from that one. He's kind of scared right now because he's trying to figure out where to spend his time, really kind of as cloud computing rises. So, Alistair, where would you tell him to prioritize his time in terms of how he should be looking at his infrastructure as it's going to layer into cloud computing going forward?
I think the CIO has a real problem right now because they get so bogged down in the mundane issues of today. I was reading an article just today that said the CIO is really worried about network bandwidth for BYOB. I can't remember where the article was, but this was really a major concern for a CIO and how they were going to go through a year of negotiating new networking contracts.
BYOD or BYOB?
Sorry, BYOD. Thank you.
I want to work for that company.
Clearly my mind is elsewhere. Yeah, that's why it's... So I think the CIO has this problem, which is why you get these other roles coming into play in an organization. We're seeing services architects and API architects and digital officers, and we're seeing all these roles which the CIO will have to embrace, but unfortunately they are sort of bogged down in mainstream business today. So I think a CIO needs to look at it and needs to prioritize exactly what they need to put out and what they can get rid of. They need to sort of eject everything that's not core to their business. So they need to figure out what they need to do as a business and what gives them business value. Then they need to go out and find SaaS applications that will fulfill those needs that aren't core. They need to then actually look at how they are building applications internally and figure out how they can be re-architected for the cloud. And I think that that's something that people often overlook, is how do they actually restructure their business? How do they restructure their IT organizations to leverage the cloud? Because it's not trivial. To use infrastructure as a service or platform as a service, you really have to design applications differently and you have to design your business subtly differently. So I think that the CIO is torn between these two things of how do they restructure for the cloud and how do they continue to serve the needs of their existing business.
So Eric, you're a CIO of a Global 2000 company. Where are you spending your time? What are you changing?
I think you're fundamentally changing a lot. And for a long time, you wanted to change it, but you didn't have a real mandate. I mean, the average tenure of a CIO is probably about 3 years. So basically, if you want to do anything interesting, the lifers in the company just wait you out. They nod and they say, yeah, that's great. And they wait till you're gone. That's awesome. Yeah, absolutely, we're going to do that. And then they go back and do whatever they're going to do. And eventually you get fired. So what's changing now is that the CEO has come down and said, no, it's not going to take 18 months to get these applications to market so we can go bring this mobile application or social application to Indonesia. Or no, it's not going to take $10 million anymore. We're going to cut $1 billion out of our annual spend. You need to get these applications to market in a fraction of the time. And in fact, give me the same convenience I can get from Amazon EC2 or from Salesforce, but I want it internally and with full compliance. So the CIO now has something meaty to sink their teeth into, and it has a full business partnership between IT and the business units can now come together. So I think it's actually an exciting time. Most CIOs now have the same target architecture. So what you're trying to do, and to answer your question, your primary objective is to change the model on its head, stop becoming a provider of packaged goods, and start to become a service broker where you create a contestable ecosystem of providers. In other words, instead of locking yourself in to any one provider, you're going to create a management capability across multiple providers, play them off one another, drive prices down where necessary, and create standardized platforms that you can migrate your applications onto so you need less people to run them, and then automate every process so you can bring things to market faster. So it's a fairly standard playbook now, what they're targeting and trying to do, but it's still very early in that IT transformation.
Just to interject, I think that that's a new role for the enterprise architect. They really have to be careful about how they build their applications going forwards, because if you lose that leverage, if all you do is stick all your data into one platform as a service provider and you can't get it out, or you negotiate a crappy contract, or whatever the case might be, and you're stuck with that single provider, then you're possibly in a worse situation than when you started.
So I'll interject on that one.
I disagree with you, Mr. Palier.
I wish I could. Unfortunately, you're much smarter than me, so I won't do that. But I will say this, that it used to be that nobody gets fired for hiring IBM was this kind of enterprise mantra. Now you do get fired for hiring IBM because it shows that you are not thinking it through correctly. You can hire IBM, but you have to make sure that you're not locking yourself in. In fact, I'll go so far as to say I don't think any large IT outsourcing contracts are going to be renewed on the same terms anymore. I think that entire business is going to crumble based on this model shift.
And I'll interject. I'll interject to the interject. The only comment I would add to this is the implications of security, which is something the CIOs really need to consider, because if you have many different applications in the cloud running all over the place, how are your users interacting with it? How are your partners, resellers, vendors interacting with it? And what is the implication of one of those as an employee transitions or as anything changes to access to critical company sensitive information? So.
I'm afraid to talk in my microphone. Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, when you get to the CIO's role in a company, it's definitely changing. It's challenging. When we go out and we meet with CIOs of small companies and large companies, what we're finding is the ones that want to talk about it are typically the most progressive, and they're finding that this is actually a really fun problem to solve if you're not stuck in the waiting game of a huge company, where you can truly embrace the organization to be more efficient and to I talked to a guy I met out there, Alan, who was telling me about moving to Edgecast. He walked up to Alex and said, I love Edgecast, and away from Akamai. And I was like, well, this is the perfect example of what CIOs need to embrace, is people in the company doing that and being allowed to do that, but the CIO knowing about it. So you're either going to know about it or you're not, and if you're a progressive CIO or CTO, you're gonna figure out the balance between those, and it's really challenging, which also equals it's really fun.
So there's this thing called the cloud-focused organization that's starting to appear. And it becomes kind of a change in organization, a change in infrastructure, and kind of a change in culture, right? People need to change. Ultimately, thinking needs to change around utilization of this technology. And I found as a consultant, I can change the technology, and that's the easy thing to do, but it's changing the people and the perceptions and the culture, ultimately, that causes the issue. So what do we do, Eric?
Yeah. First of all, the CIO has to be willing to, metaphorically, not actually, shoot people. You actually have to get tough, because there's going to be stoppers. There are people who don't want to change, and they've been there for 25 years, they want to be there for another 25 years, and they want the model to stay the same, and they will thwart you. So if you want to make change, you actually have to remove some people that are agitators, and you have to get strong about that. But you also have to start to encourage people, or at least give them a sense that, well, there might be less people in certain parts of the organization, and that's going to create efficiency. There needs to be more people in other parts of the organization. In other words, it's not that you don't need an IT organization. It just needs to be retrained. So instead of perhaps doing busy work around provisioning servers, you might have a job around engineering platforms so that people can consume them. You might have a job that's more about consulting between the business organization and the IT organization. What's that?
Or automation.
Or automating processes, right? And streamlining them to make things more simple. So the jobs need to change. People need to be encouraged that they're actually going to become more relevant to the business. And then change with the CIO. But it's going to take strong leadership. We've seen it over and over again. The ones who don't have strong leadership are going to spin around and wait until there's hard and true examples they can follow. And the ones that do are actually making a difference.
Even go one better. I think the ones that don't have strong leaderships that are able to take their business to the kind of the agile state, we're able to create solutions quicker, are going to basically demotify their business. Is going to go out of business ultimately. So the competitors are going to eat their lunch if they're able to basically be nimble around them and nimble around the business. And I think in 10 years, you are going to see businesses that are completely gone because they couldn't solve their own internal problems at the speed of their competitors.
80% of the IT budgets go to, or more, goes to keep the lights on, not to innovation. So if you have a competitor in your same business that is suddenly turning the tables and taking that sunk cost and putting it into innovation and getting new products to market at speeds you can only dream of, you will go out of business.
So Alex, should we be firing people? Should we be telling people to go to cloud? Should we all be getting tattoos and joining secret organizations? Or, you know what, these guys want to know what to do.
I like the secret organizations. I think, one of the things that has made cloud possible is many things coming together at the same time. One is bandwidth and capacity availability. Second is engineers and IT organizations maturing and adopting new ways of doing things. And at the same time, data center cost structures, new technology innovation, and all these things coming together at the same time has made it very possible for us to have tremendous amount of computing power with minimal investment at a second's notice, where you can literally turn up infrastructure and use it to do really solve interesting problems. So when you look at the people within the organization, the question really is, I tend to always focus on where I can create the most value and less so on where I can save a few percentage points on cost. And the question for me always comes out as, who can help me innovate or learn from our customers or learn how to improve our product sets faster, better, and how can we create that feedback loop so that we're constantly innovating and building the organization, building new products, new features, taking it to the next level. So I think as you look at people, it's not that we're firing some or hiring some. We're looking for people that are more that are able to adapt to the organization differently. And they're able to look at different metrics, different KPIs, and draw different sets of conclusions. And within the IT organization, we're very much looking at people that can automate processes, procedures, automate the innovation process within the organization.
So, Scott, if I'm changing to a cloud-focused organization, where do I start? Do I start at the operations level? Do I start at the executive board level? Do I start at both?
I think the key is to first recognize you already are a cloud organization. You just might not know it yet. And that's true no matter what business you're in. And so given that that is the case, if you are not aware of it, it means that you are facing what we like to call at my company software anarchy. And that means that everyone has done anything that they wanted to, because as people moved out of, everyone knows the Mark Benioff paradigm shift, right, from mainframe to client server and then to cloud. And what the cloud thing was really missing is this layer of control. It turned into anyone can install anything they want to any of their machines because it wasn't installed anymore. So realizing that that exists, I think, is the first step to doing something about it, and then figuring out what battles it's worth tackling. So as an IT organization, do you care if your organization is, has 20 Twitter accounts that they're using for corporate communications? You probably do. Where does that sit in importance to who's accessing an ERP system, or who decided that Salesforce wasn't good and is now moving over to Sugar CRM? And so getting your arms around it, I think, is the biggest challenge. And then it's what do you do about it? And I think you pick your battles. For mission critical software, there will be a lot of lockdown. There always will, especially when you talk about compliance and PCI. But when you talk about things that aren't mission critical to the organization, adopting is something that should be embraced. So I think from a CIO perspective, step one is you already are a cloud organization. If you don't think you are, you better figure out why you are, and you should already know that.
Well, it's one thing to be a cloud organization, and this is going to be to you because this is kind of your core business, right? And to a bit Eric's business. Because we are going to get to a point where if we're going to get into be a cloud organization, we have to be used to sharing and services and resources and allocating things on demand and getting into these very complex distributed architectures. We're actually using things that come in from outside the organization at times and using things inside the organization at times. The ability to manage massive amounts of information and be able to do so where we can have instantaneous feedback that comes directly back from the database that we maintain. And we just don't seem to be able to, within the organizations that I'm talking to, grasp the concepts and how it's going to take to get there. They know cloud is good, okay? But the path to get there, the architectural challenges to make the changes, is where they have a tendency to get caught up in. And Alistair, I'm going to go to you first. I bet you, Eric, you have something to say about that as well.
Yeah, I think the key point here is automation and prescription. So you do, as an organization, need to look at the pace of change of technology. And an organization almost any organization today cannot afford to continue the way they're doing business, simply by the fact that technology is changing so much faster than it was, say, 15, 20 years ago. And you think about 15, 20 years ago, those people who didn't adopt websites, a lot of them are out of business. So the pace of technology change is increasing. So there's pressure from the top down to change and restructure the way the business works. So we're getting a lot of support in that way. And I think that that's new. I think that that's newer than it was certainly 8 years ago. Might be an obvious statement, but bear with me. Then we're starting to see the emergence of a sort of an API economy. As people are exposing APIs as a new channel for their business and directly interacting with mobile applications and B2B partners, they're starting to see the API as a channel. Then we're starting to see a whole new breed of developers come in from the grassroots up, and they are used to sharing. They are, you know, culturally more adapted to this whole attitude of trying to share and leverage external resources and internal resources, and just the general whole culture of open source and collaboration is not foreign to them. So I think that there's a number of different pressures, as you said earlier, there's a number of different pressures from different angles that I think makes it a lot riper at this time than it was 8 years ago when we were trying to do service orientation. So what we're seeing now with businesses is we're seeing a smaller patch of resistance. And I think the way to overcome that patch of resistance is through automation. If you have support from the top down, then you can automate and prescribe certain processes that people just adopt because it's the easiest way to adopt things. And it just becomes part of their lives, and they don't really have any choices, and they can't really make any contrary decisions to that process that you've automated in place. So that's how we've worked together with customers to actually get service enablement or API management or cloud management into place inside those organizations and change the culture from the outside.
Or the ability to manage data assets effectively as well.
Right.
Eric?
Yeah. So I agree with that, with Alistair. I mean, the trends, and certainly what I've been following over the decades that I've been starting companies, each trend builds on the next. So when I've been building companies that focus on enterprise enablement, obviously the last great shift was the late 90s, probably, when the internet really came to fruition and changed the way people organize their businesses. The open source movement, and then when SOA kicked up, looking at how service architectures was going to, again, affect the next step of how we organize our IT. But what's happened over time is that these incremental innovations and incremental changes were not good enough, right? What happened was that the companies are sagging under their own weight. They're simply unsustainable. Now, as long as your profits are up and your growth is high, nobody pays attention. Nobody shines a light in the dark corners, and you can just continue to become more and more inefficient. But what's happened recently is that the economic downturn, coupled with a new set of nimble competitors, is putting new pressures on the enterprise. When we work with a company like Visa, they're more worried about Google than they are about MasterCard, right? Banks are more worried about telcos than other banks, about getting in between them and their customer. And not just existing telcos, but startup telcos, like people think Google or Facebook might become. So these companies that can move really fast are now big threats. And if you look at how the enterprise has grown up today through acquisitions and piling up dissimilar systems after dissimilar systems, every time they want to build a new application, and they do this thousands of times a year, they come forward and they build some new Rube Goldberg machine underneath, some insane topology of capabilities, and then they make it work, and then they go off and work somewhere else and leave the enterprise there for 30 years to have to manage it. And it happens again and again and again. And that weight of the lack of standardization and all the manual steps that it takes to maintain that and build on that is so expensive that all the money, billions of dollars a year, are being plowed into that. It simply has to stop, and this is the way that it's going to stop.
Good point. Alex, what do you think?
The only comment I would like to add is, I think you got to look at application maturity and where you're going to differentiate. Because if you have an application that was just deployed, say, a year ago, the whole infrastructure is set up, the application is integrated, let's say it's a finance application and your finance team is very happy with it, it's doing everything they want it to do. Do you have to just say, I have to go to the cloud, so I got to rip it apart and deploy it out there? I don't think that's going to get you much. But if you think about some of the points that you brought up, where the banks are worried about the telcos getting between them and their customers, now you need to think about new applications, and how are you going to bring those applications to market faster? And the cloud is a very easy way to leverage that and to deploy that. So thinking about the ROI, where you can have the maximum impact and where you can get the maximum differentiation in the marketplace and how fast you can take it to market, I think can help the CIO decide where they're going to invest their dollars and what they're going to take to the cloud first. And as other applications go through their maturity cycle, then they're going to be prime candidates to be redeployed out there in a more efficient structure.
So Scott, is this really kind of a fundamental shift in the way in which we think about developing business solutions, or is this all about the cloud, or both?
I think it's both. I think it's both. I think that it's shifting the way that we think about building applications, but it's not really actually shifting the thought process that originated that. So it's just another paradigm. It just happens to be that we're in a very exciting state of temporary chaos, where companies like Service Mesh and SOA like solve real problems and try to take chaos and make meaning out of it. And to a certain extent, Bitium is in that spot as well, of saying, what do you do as things shift into cloud, and how do you deal with it as an organization, with the forethought of where is it going in 10 years, versus thinking about just cloud is new, it's got to be great, let's do something in cloud. It's just a different mechanism of delivery, and the products and tools that exist to get things to market fast speed up every day. And that's why it's so exciting. And to a certain extent, that's why it's a little bit depressing when you see great startups being acquired by Salesforce left and right, because they're trying to pull it all together in a non-cohesive way, and it's not necessarily creating value. But competitors arrive because of how fast it is to deploy a server, to get code written in new programming languages that didn't exist 10 years ago. So I think it's a very exciting time, but it's very chaotic at the same time.
Yeah, and I think to the point that's being made by the panel, I think the big guys out there, the IBMs, the CAs, and go on in the world, kind of see this as kind of a core space they're looking to invest in. They're out there buying people. I'll say Mashery went, Layer 7 went. People who compete with some of the guys who are on the stage right now. So I think they're getting it, and I think that the enterprises are kind of getting it. The big guys who realize they can't innovate their way to success are getting it, and they're going off and taking the smaller players out. So you think this is kind of the start of a fundamental shift in thinking and how we're going to leverage the technology. So it's much more than cloud. It's about taking all the traditional assets that we have within the enterprise, be able to put them in some kind of a more productive state so we can get to agility, we can get to service-based use, we can get to massive amounts of data management, things like that. That seems to be where we're kind of on the cusp of doing that right now, and just feels that way. Do you agree, Eric?
I definitely agree. There's a fundamental shift here. In fact, the only thing I would disagree with in terms of what we've been saying up here for a little while is just the use of the notion of the cloud, right? Because as everyone has actually pointed out in their comments, it's not about moving to the cloud or how do you get to the cloud. It's really about a shift in operating model. And you can call it a cloud operating model, but it's not necessarily a cloud as we know it, as Salesforce or as EC2. The operating model is about on demand. It's about how do you deliver IT as a service directly to the business in order to allow the business to become empowered to get their job done faster. So automation, standardization, and the delivery of resources from a contestable set of vendors. So when we talk about cloud resources, we're talking about infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service, but from internal, when you talk about the enterprise, from internal and external service providers, right? And these applications and these platforms and these infrastructure capabilities all have to be somehow managed and delivered in a way that can ultimately withstand regulatory scrutiny and compliance. But if you can do that, then you're talking about a fundamental shift, not in how IT works, but in terms of how the entire business functions.
Makes sense. Alistair, what do you think?
I think if you look at certain parts of IT, they're going to end up competing with external vendors. And I think that presents an interesting opportunity for the business to actually bargain and to create an economy or to at least put one against the other. And what that'll end up doing is it'll take all the things that are not core and remove them from IT, because IT will look internally and say, what am I good at? What do I have that's sticky for the business? Because the business is going to look at Salesforce and say, my IT organization can't create a better CRM or whatever the case might be. So they're going to be farming out these things left, right, and center. And IT is going to end up consolidating down to a set of core business things that actually are sticky for the business, that have regulatory concerns, that they can do well or better than a service provider. Because there are things that you can do better internally than you can get from an IaaS provider.
Like innovate. Quit trying to build things that are already built.
Amazon
is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. So they will end up focusing on that core piece of the business, and they will be part of a larger ecosystem. And then the CIO and enterprise architect, their role is to design something that's actually going to work for the business. And their role is to make sure that whatever applications get built on infrastructure and platform as a service are portable.
What do you think, Alex?
I'll give you an example. We just went through this 3 weeks ago. To your point, VP of HR comes along, and we were talking about at an exec meeting about a learning management system that is needed to certify our outside developers as well as internal people for learning of our product set and how to use the tools. And he was thinking that he's going to go through IT and deploy a system, and it's going to take a year or so to get a learning management system in place. And I encouraged him, and he's an old school VP of HR, which I happen to like very much. And I told him that, no, why don't you go out there and look for some cloud-based solutions, some SaaS-based applications, and see what you can come up with. A week later, at the next exec meeting, he said that we have a solution that we really like. We evaluated 3 different vendors. This one is being POC'd by our internal staff. And at the second week, 2 exec meetings later, he's like, we really like this vendor. We can have it deployed. You can use it right now, and you can literally take this initiative that we have around training to market within a few weeks by just us uploading our content to it, and we're done. And I think that's the value that the cloud provides, where the business unit head does not need to necessarily go through IT to get a whole application deployed and see his initiative through. He can go directly to the vendor, get it going, and increase his time, speed up his time to market.
But you don't want to do that.
He's doing that right now.
He's doing that.
He's doing that. Maybe he's an exception. Yeah.
Most people don't want to do it. In fact, they're afraid if they do that and continue to do that, they're going to lose their job.
It's really dependent on the culture you set within the company. Is the culture, how do you balance accountability versus innovation? If you go way too far in accountability and people don't want to touch anything and do anything at the risk that they might fail and lose their job. But if you encourage innovation and you embrace risk, then it's okay if some projects fail, but at least people are trying and innovating. And that becomes really powerful depending on the kind of culture you want to build within your organization.
Now I got to take you on some consulting calls. I think open up your eyes. So what do you think, Scott?
Alex is a great CEO. I know people that work for Alex, and it's an organization where people can embrace things and move. And I think that there's kind of a lesson here, which is beware of the other type of CEO of an organization that's non-technical, that leans on the CTO as the technologist. And I've run into very few companies, but they exist, where the CTO refuses to admit or acknowledge that IT is not locked down, that Salesforce is being used, that people in the company use Google Docs in the company. And those CTOs, when you walk down the hall of that organization, the first thing you'll find is somebody seeking you out, tapping you on the shoulder saying, they don't know what they're doing. We all use Google Docs. We use Salesforce. Don't tell them because they're, no, I'm being, it's funny, but it's really something to be aware of in an organization that, and I would say that by the nature of the people that are in this room, if you find yourself in that type of organization, I would say, if you're happy with being complacent, great. If you want to be challenged and have fun in your job, find another job as fast as you can.
So we're hiding stuff from central IT now. That's kind of what it's come to, right? Is that where things are going?
Well, so, I think, if I might, one of the more interesting CIOs that I've met has a very sort of structured but portfolio-based approach to how they acquire technology and what they implement. So the people in the organization don't feel the need to hide, because the CIO has a very sort of public approach to how they acquire technologies. They will take on certain things that are high risk and high return, and some things that are stable and will have potentially low return but low risk. So they go out and they sort of market themselves as that kind of CIO. And what that does is it gives you a certain amount of immunity for when things do hit the fan. Occasionally you are going to invest in a startup that goes bomb, or a startup that gets bought by CA. Whatever the case might be, you're going to end up you're going to end up with certain elements of your portfolio failing, but
You guys have an announcement to make that we
no.
should do right now?
It really does encourage a culture within that organization of innovation, and it also helps the startup community, which helps everybody.
Alex, you agree with that?
I do.
Eric, do you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I definitely do. I think that you have to have that kind of leadership from the top down. And what you're finding, and very much agree with Scott as well, is that the business has to get the job done. That's their goal. And if IT is not going to be there for them anymore, suddenly what's occurred that never existed in the history of the enterprise is choice. And it might not be choice that's approved, it may not be choice that's compliant with regulatory bodies, but it's choice. And if you have to get something done, you're going to do it, especially if you go home and you have none of those constraints and you can actually be productive. So what's going to win out is convenience and the fastest path to success. And if you can't offer that same convenience as an IT organization, they will go around you. And that's a whole phenomenon that's become known as shadow IT.
Absolutely. So I wrote a blog at InfoWorld last week. It always has to be about me, right? Where I predicted where things were going to be in 10 years. And this was a challenge that someone made to me. Where's cloud computing going to be in 10 years? And I basically said, we're not going to be talking about cloud anymore. We're going to be talking about services and the utilization of services in between organizations through centralized and distributed repositories we all have access to, public and private. And the ability to get at public and private information and data, and basically take all these resources and combine and recombine them into applications or business solutions over and over again. Have innate security that's bound to all these resources since they're a common identity management infrastructure, things like that. And of course I always read the reviews and little things. I said, Linthicum's an idiot, and I had just like a bunch of people, but I got hit a ton. And the reason I make the predictions, number one, is no one is going to hell remember the prediction I made 10 years ago in 10 years, so I can't be proven wrong, because everybody's attention spans are light. But also I think that that's where things are going. I think eventually we're heading in this direction, at least I hope. So where am I going wrong, Scott?
I don't know that you're going wrong. So you mentioned a whole bunch of things in that. Yeah.
Rant, yeah. Thanks.
You know, it's interesting because there are still things that we lean on as fundamental technologies for a business, and a good example of that would be Microsoft's Active Directory, right? It's not going anywhere. People can say whatever they want about Google Auth, but the fact is that it is the identity access management system. So when Salesforce comes out and they say we have Salesforce ID, Salesforce Identity, and we're competing directly with cloud and identity access management, yet has anyone up here ever heard of any company using Salesforce Identity? Right. So there are technologies that as cloud progresses and as things become agile, companies like Microsoft eventually catch up and can iterate, and they buy companies like Yammer to try to, I guess, inject that culture into their company. Whether or not that's possible or not, I don't know. But I think the point here is that specifically with identity access management, which is so fundamental to every organization, the existing incumbents aren't going anywhere anytime soon, and maybe they shouldn't.
So what are your predictions in 10 years? What are we going to be talking about? What would be a panel that we'd be discussing? What are we going to be talking about in 10 years that's cool and hot and way to change enterprise IT? Or will we have solved all the problems by then?
The problems will never always be solved, right? So moving things to the cloud, is that really different than having things on a mainframe? Well, it's different because it's a browser, not a thin client. But it's really paradigms that move and are circular and they recycle. So are we going to go through another cycle? I think that now that the infrastructure that exists for both bandwidth and capacity makes it so that this is not going to go away. Things are not going to return to the mainframe. So that's what I think.
Where are we going to be in 10 years, Eric?
Well, I guess if you can go out on a limb and no one can check in 10 years, I'll tell you exactly what's going to happen. So in 2 years, every single enterprise and every single government in the world will have exactly the same target architecture, which will be a hybrid cloud operating model, where a contestable set of service providers will be managed centrally and delivered as a service directly to the business. And that will be a ubiquitous goal for all enterprises and governments. In 5 years, They will actually achieve this in a widespread manner, and it'll completely upend the entire existing set of players. IBM, HP, CA, Oracle, their entire, the fundamental aspects of the business are going to have to change. Some of these antiquated tools will start to be bypassed. Companies like Chef and Puppet are going to thrive and get rid of the configuration management systems of today. Hadoop is going to explode, and a lot of the typical database applications are going to change. So this entire model is going to change the IT ecosystem in 5 years. I think in 7 years, the standardization is going to become so intense that people are going to be consuming, the consumers, the business units that actually buy this from the enterprise, are going to be consuming services and not care at all what the underlying components are. They don't care if it's a Cisco router or a hamster on a treadmill. What they care about is that the SLA is met, right? And what that's going to do, it's going to completely destroy the margins of every single organization that has no differentiation under the hood, powered by the service consumption unit of provision and by the standardization of the compute units. In 10 years, because we have the standardization of compute units, you'll actually start to see compute units being traded like commodities on commodities exchanges around the world.
Yeah, I'm talking to companies today who are trying to set up such exchanges now. I mean, the emphasis is there. So the trend is starting. So where are we going to be in 10 years, Alex?
I agree with a lot of the things that were said. I would add one additional item. I think you're going to be able to achieve incredible efficiencies in how a lot of IT is being delivered beyond what we're talking about. Because let's go through it as an example. If you're using Salesforce and a third-party company can come and with just giving them a username password, they can scan your usage of the system and come up with a more optimal way your Salesforce needs to operate and give you direct recommendations. Now you no longer have to spend a year to get that service in terms of analyzing and iterating and getting them access to your data. They could do it on the spot in a second, and next day your Salesforce could be more optimal. Now, if you think about this across all your IT services, combine this with big data and how you can analyze data to get really good insight, I think companies are going to be able to change at nanosecond speeds. And once that becomes around, I think then your comment about underlying differentiation becomes very, very important, because if you're not on it, literally the next day, somebody else could be eating your lunch.
So we're going to take the latency out of IT, and we're going to become innovative in terms of we're going to use humans for what humans should be used for, to build new stuff and innovate and invent and do all the cool things at the speed of change.
Yes.
And I think that's where we're going to be in 10 years. Did you have a follow-up, Eric?
No, but I'm happy that you're seeing the exchanges occur now so that I can track it for the next 10 years.
Yeah, yeah, it's the next big startup, I guess. So bring us home, Alistair. Where are you going to be in 10 years?
Well, if I think of it from a different angle, I do agree with everything that was said, but I like to think of it from the outside in potentially. So if I look at the proliferation of devices, I can see that the majority of the consumption is going to be mobile. So if I think that the majority of the consumption is going to be mobile, then that leads me to believe that the majority of application development, whether it be enterprise application development or some guy in his garage, it's going to be in the cloud. Which then takes me to the next level, where the existing organizations that do have large IT and do have large business value are actually going to shrink to the point where they have a set of APIs and a set of core business values, and that's it. So there's going to be almost like a 3-tier system, potentially. There's going to be a whole emerging layer of people who are inventing and building applications, which is an aggregation of services and APIs. They, in turn, are then going to be exposing APIs to allow people to build applications on mobile devices. And we see this today, and I think that in 10 years' time, it's just going to be the norm. Like Chinese food is just food in China. That's the way that things are going to be. You know, people are shifting all of their application development into the cloud. We're going to have to control it. We're going to have to manage it. But I also see that existing businesses are, if I look at 10 years ago, they built websites, and if they didn't, they went out of business. Now, if they don't start consolidating, thinking about what the APIs are, how they're going to expose those, and how they're going to be reused by people who are building these new layer and new generation of applications, then they too are going to go out of business.
I think it's absolutely right. I think that we're in a cusp of change. Things are changing. Okay, we're moving into the cloud. Basically, it's initial way of changing. The platforms are starting to show up. But we're rethinking the ways in which we're doing IT. That's the best thing right now that we're doing. And so we're starting to ask the questions, why not? Why can't we get the applications done in a week? Why can't we get the data consolidated so we have centralized access to it? Why can't I allocate resources directly to my business problems as I need them allocated directly to the business problem? I have to go into cycles and hardware, software changes and things like that. And we're on the journey right now, and this, it's way up here and we're way down here. And so we just started. Companies such as these guys lead are basically leading the way. Companies you may be working for are in essence leading the way. And we certainly have some big movers and shakers out in the business that are moving forward. So this is real, this is happening, it's not just a trend, and now it's time to start thinking differently in how you do IT. So I want to thank you for attending the panel. I also want to thank our expert panelists, thought leaders and business leaders.